Welcome back, Sinead here again. We're going to have our third tutorial for Bluebell Arts project. Don't forget, if you want to contact them, the email is bluebellartsproject@hotmail.com. So today we're going to have a look at composition. You've spent the last few lessons learning how to use your camera to the best of its ability. So now you know the theory behind it. How can you take a better photograph? So for today's lesson, we're going to have a look at composition. I'm going to show you two PowerPoint presentations. So the first one is the most basic rules of composition. And it's a really good idea to practice these. Once you're really familiar with them, you'll find particular one or ones that you like most. And you'll get better at taking those. It's also a really good way of making kind of an uninteresting photograph look a bit more interesting. So composition is the placement or arrangement of visual elements or ingredients in a photograph. So what that means is think about how you want your photograph to look and frame the picture rather than just clicking. Take a wee bit of time to get the most from your photograph. So here are some of the most basic rules of composition. Depth of field. We had a look at depth of field in the last lesson. We're also going to look at pattern, symmetry, rule of thirds, texture, and lines. So for this first one, we're looking at a shallow depth of field. And you can see that this makes it really clear where your focal point is in the picture. Everything that's in front of the boy and behind the boy is a nice soft focus. So you have time to take in what's around him. You know he's outside. You know there are flowers. It's summertime. But your eyes have a place to rest. So that's your focal point. The opposite end of that is a deep or a wide depth of field. So this photograph was taken up at the Mussadin Temple. And I wanted to show the full scene. So you can see the Mussadin Temple in the background and the man training his horse in the water. So everything's in focus because it's all important for this particular photograph. Pattern. So pattern can either be regular, like this particular picture is, or you can try and be a bit more creative and look for irregular pattern. So this is a way of taking something that's really boring. Forks aren't the most exciting thing to take photographs of, but you can just make them look a little bit more interesting by putting them in a regular pattern. This is something you can definitely practice around the house. Symmetry. So if you remember from school, symmetry is when you can draw a line down the middle and everything is the same. For this particular one, top to bottom, but sometimes it might be from side to side. So this was taken quite a few years ago when we had the really frosty winter. I think it was 2010. Rule of thirds. So the rule of thirds is a technique where you can either bring this grid up. Some cameras will actually let you display this grid. But you don't really need to have it. These are your points of interest. The idea is that you place your main subject either on one of these, or it could be, over to one side, or indeed the other side. So you would focus your photograph. Usually, most people have center-weighted focus. So by that I mean the center of your frame is where the focus will be taken when you press your shutter button halfway. So have that pressed halfway, and then you can just move your camera slightly to the left or slightly to the right, and that will give you rule of thirds, but also make sure your focus is in the right place. For example, we have this wee bee. So the bee, because it's off to one side, this is using the rule of thirds. So again, this is one of these photographs where you can look around, you can tell where the bee is, what's going on, but we try to keep the rest of the subject quite soft and the bee really, really sharp with a shallow depth of field so that he stands out more. Texture. The idea of texture is when you can imagine what it feels like by looking at a photograph. So I've gone for crunchy autumn leaves here. You can imagine kind of the sound and the feeling that goes along with this photograph. But it doesn't have to be a crunchy texture. It can be smooth or soft. Again, have a look around your home and get creative. Or if you have the opportunity to be outside on a wee daily walk, look for texture. Lines. So lines are also a good way of drawing a person into a photograph. So the lines here go down and round the corner, which leads you into the photograph. This has a wider depth of field so that you can see, but without too much detail, some of the trees in the background. You still have quite a clear focal point on the man. He's sharper than everything else in the photograph. So they are your first rules of composition. I'll just bring this one back up again. Depth of field, pattern, symmetry, rule of thirds, texture and lines. Practice those. It'll help you, give you some direction of what to take photographs of. You could set yourself a challenge where it's like one day I'm going to focus on depth of field. The next day you could focus on symmetry and just perfect those. Once you've learned them, got them into your brain, they'll come to you more naturally. And the thing with photography is as well, a really good photograph can be taking something quite boring and ordinary and making it look more interesting. Because we're not going on holiday or taking trips away at the minute. So be creative around your home and try and think of everyday objects and how you can get them to look a bit more interesting. Sometimes you might like to apply a couple of these rules of composition together. Like I like to apply depth of field and rule of thirds. Like for example, this one. That's probably my go-to. Now, I'm going to give you another example of composition that you can look at after you've perfected those. So, simplify the subject. When you look at a scene with your naked eye, your brain quickly picks out subjects of interest, but the camera doesn't discriminate. It captures everything in front of it, which can lead to a cluttered, messy picture with no clear focal point. So a way of simplifying the subject is to take a silhouette like this one. So how that would have been achieved is to purposely underexpose the photograph. So we're not looking at the people here really, we're looking at the shape and the outline of them, which is nicely framed by the door. If that was taken correctly exposed, it wouldn't be as interesting a photograph. Also, possibly changing it to black and white has made it a stronger image too. This is another example of a silhouette. So you can take photographs like this. We have lovely evenings now. Hopefully we'll be having some more good weather. You'll have nice skies. So look for things that you can practice underexposing to create a silhouette. The reason why it works. So move in close and cut out other parts of the pictures of the scene. Silhouettes make strong subjects and concentrate on the shape rather than the subject when taking a silhouette. Think about interesting shapes, especially against nice skies. So horizontal versus vertical. It's easy to get stuck in a rut and take every picture with the camera held horizontally. Try turning it to get a vertical shot instead, adjusting your position or the zoom setting as you experiment with your new style. Or take both and see what you like. You know, digital is very easy, just delete what you don't want. Here's an example of a picture that if it had have been taken horizontally or landscape style, then that means that there would have been an awful lot of space around the girl that maybe wasn't necessary for that particular photograph. For this photo, there would have been too much empty space. Try both. Experiment taking photos in both orientations and later you can decide which you like best. As I said, there would have been too much empty space in the other photograph, but negative space can be a good thing. Negative space defines and emphasizes the main subject of a photo, drawing your eye to it. It provides breathing room, giving your eye somewhere to rest and prevent your image from appearing too cluttered. So the negative space would be the space around the bee. If this was cropped in tighter, it just might feel a little bit too intense of a photograph. Another example is this one. This photograph was taken, an action shot. To begin with, I thought, oh, I've gone and chopped off the top of her head, but I actually feel like it was a happy accident. It's this kind of negative space gives a different feeling to the photograph, and also this is for a musician. This can be used for adding text, gigs that are coming up, things like that. Using negative space can help you focus on the shape of your image, which ultimately creates better composed images. It can isolate your focal point from the background, a different point of view, and something interesting to experiment with. Leading lines. So a poorly composed photograph will leave your viewers unsure where to look, and their attention might drift aimlessly around the scene without finding a clear focal point. However, you can use lines to control the way people's eyes move around your picture. Converging lines give a strong sense of perspective and three-dimensional depth, drawing you into an image. Curved lines can lead you on a journey around the frame, leading you towards the main subject. So you can see the pathway curves in here. This is following the line of thirds, but the lines do take you on a journey, and the journey of the boy to meet the rest of his family. There's an awful lot more going on in the photograph, but with these strong rules of composition, hopefully the focal point is quite clear where you're supposed to be looking. When photographs contain lines, subconsciously our eyes follow them, leading us to the focal point. Converging lines work well coming in from the corners. Curved lines also work well from corners. This helps our brains understand what otherwise might seem a busy scene. Space to move. Even though photographs themselves are static, they can still convey a strong sense of movement. Using a slow shutter speed or following a moving subject with a high shutter speed will blur the background and create a sense of movement. So this was used by taking the photograph by panning, and what panning means is having quite a high shutter speed, following the moving subject with your camera and taking the photograph as you move along. So the people are quite still, but you know that they're not static because the background is blurred. This gives you the sense of movement, and also you're given sense that they have somewhere to move into, whereas if it had been cropped in tighter, you wouldn't have that same sense of movement. The moving subject is given space to move, as I said. For this photo, the shutter speed was high to achieve a sharp focus, and the blurred background was created by panning, as I was saying. Don't forget the background. Don't just concentrate on your subject. Look at what's happening in the background too. This ties in with simplifying the scene and filling the frame. You can't usually exclude the background completely, of course, but you can control it. You can move around. So, like, this photograph was a headshot for a wee girl who's an actress, and she is the main subject, obviously. So I didn't want to have like the studio background just completely plain. So we took this with trees in the background. You have a sense of where she is, but it's not distracting from her face. Like something like this might be. I found this on the internet. Even this photograph, it's not quite as bad as the flowers coming out of the lady's head, but I feel like it's a really beautiful photo that would have been much nicer if it wasn't for this post in the background. And all that would have meant was the photographer just needed to move a little bit either side, and they could have taken quite a different photograph. So use long focal length, which is your zoom, and wide aperture, which is low f-stops, to throw a busy background out of focus, like that first picture of the girl. Fill the frame. The less space that is taken up by a busy background, the better, especially when you're trying to take that kind of headshot. Choose your camera position. If you don't like the background, change your position until you do, and avoid poles and objects coming out of people's heads, unless you want to do that for fun. Use a focal point. The reason a focal point is important is that when you look at an image, your eye will generally need a resting place or something of interest to really hold it. Without it, you'll find people will simply glance at your shots and then move on to the next one. So you've seen this picture before. This is my son a few years ago. So nice, clear, strong focal point and the use of rule of thirds. So you know where he is, but also exactly what you're supposed to be looking at. So your focal point can be enhanced by your position, by using the rule of thirds, your focus, using a shallow depth of field tells the viewer exactly where they're supposed to be looking. And size, let your focal point take up most of your frame. So don't be afraid to get close to your subject. I often see people taking photographs just very far away from what their main focal point is. Get a bit closer. Children. So a tip when you're photographing children is to get down to their level. When they're taken from a height, they are dwarfed. They can be interesting photographs too, but in general, it's better to get down to their level. So rather than looking at her from really high above, I got to exactly eye level so that you're looking right in. She's full in the frame there too. Full in the frame really lets you get to know the subject. A photo taken from above or too far away leaves the subject a little lost. The child needs to feel at ease with you to get a natural picture. Try playing a game to get them natural, happy, candid shots. There we go. So as I said, for this particular lesson, definitely start off with that first PowerPoint, those first rules of composition. And when you feel like you've perfected those, you can move on to some other interesting rules of composition. Good luck. So we started off with a very simple set of rules of composition. I would recommend that you practice those first. Once you feel like you've done as much as you can with those, then possibly look at that second part of the tutorial. I'd love to see some of your photographs, so please email them through and we'll be back for another lesson soon. Bye.